He called me excessive right after I flagged a second unauthorized login to the federal sandbox environment. One that happened at 3:12 a.m. from an IP address located in a WeWork parking lot in Scottsdale. Not even subtle. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just added it to the log, timestamp, 3 hours 14 minutes and 19 seconds. Noted anomaly. Possible breach vector. Forwarded to CTO. No response. That was 2 months before the IPO roadshow, 3 weeks before they decided I was a cultural bottleneck, and exactly 14 hours before the new VP of operations, Leon with the bleached teeth and LinkedIn humility posts, called me a risk we can't carry anymore, which was rich considering the last thing I carried was the department through 2 SEC compliance phases, 1 vendor embezzlement scare, and an IT director who thought encryption meant hiding the USB stick in his sock drawer. For anyone listening, yes, 97% of people never subscribe, and honestly, it's the ones who do that keep this whole thing going. So if you're in that 3%, you're the reason stories like this even get told. And if you're not yet, tap it, like it, takes a second, keeps the stories alive. Anyway, by the time Leon swaggered in, we were 4 quarters deep into pre-IPO cleanup. I had 3 laptops, 2 VPN profiles, and a folder on my desktop named Routine Logs that housed over 9,000 entries, access reports, compliance sign-offs, audit trail gaps. Every single one reviewed, cross-checked, and tagged. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. But in that office, prepared sounded like paranoid if it threatened someone's bonus. Leon hated my binders. Real, literal binders. Said they looked like a hoarder's scrapbook. He wanted dashboards, color-coded charts, bullet-pointed optimism. I wanted integrity. He wanted speed. We were incompatible by design. Enter Zach, the CTO. Imagine a Patagonia vest wrapped around a beer pong champion from Stanford who thought every system issue was just a user problem. Zach and Leon were cut from the same spreadsheet, slick, smug, and allergic to process. Zach had a habit of dismissing my reports without reading them, sometimes forwarding them back to me with the note, "Circle back post-launch," which didn't mean anything because the system he was supposed to be launching was already flagged in 4 different areas of non-compliance. The thing is, I knew what was coming before anyone said a word. The missed meetings, the accidental calendar deletions, the way my seat was moved 3 rows back from the core team without explanation. Subtle shifts, quiet disappearances, my name absent from final drafts, my initials removed from internal commits. They wanted a clean IPO narrative. I was the mudslide at the edge of their sunny mountain view. But I didn't resist. I archived. I organized. I backed up everything to a cold storage drive labeled Q2 logs, priority. I printed hard copies of access trails. I triple notarized my latest risk memo. I stayed silent, let them underestimate me, let Leon roll his eyes in meetings while Zach grinned like a Labrador who just peed on the server rack. I wasn't trying to win anymore. I was trying to survive it. And survival in compliance doesn't mean making noise. It means leaving a trail no one else knows exists until it's too late. They called it a strategic acceleration session, which, in Leon speak, meant a room full of investors and just enough catered food to make everyone forget how close we were to violating 3 clauses in our own internal controls policy. I wasn't supposed to be there. My name wasn't on the invite. But I walked in anyway, clipboard in hand, internal exposure matrix printed in color, highlighted in yellow for the one module still missing a basic audit trail. Leon smiled like a politician at a donor brunch. "Oh," he said when I sat down. "Didn't realize you'd be joining. We'll try not to get too paranoid in here." The word paranoid hung in the air like a burp after cheap champagne. A few of the younger investors chuckled. One of the older ones looked at me, puzzled, like he vaguely remembered my name from a compliance presentation he'd ignored last quarter. Leon clicked to the next slide. "We've made significant progress de-risking the pipeline. Our CTO has confirmed that all legacy controls have been deprecated for scalability. This includes Q2 system logs, which, frankly, were outdated clutter. We're prioritizing forward velocity over forensic overkill." That was the moment I knew, not suspected, knew. They weren't just minimizing me. They were erasing me. Zach nodded along, arms folded like a smug software Buddha. Yeah, we sunset most of that redundant logging framework. Didn't make sense to keep flagging ghost accounts. We've got new monitoring protocols rolling out anyway. Ghost accounts. That's what he called them. Logins from old vendor credentials, some of which had access staging environments tied to the DoD pilot sandbox. But sure, ghosts. I didn't speak. I flipped one page on my clipboard, just loud enough to be heard. The page was labeled Log Cluster Q2 Residuals / Unresolved Access Flags. I wasn't invited to the next strategy meeting, or the one after that. My security clearance wasn't revoked, but my access to 3 internal drives mysteriously vanished. When I asked IT, they claimed the system had auto-purged inactive roles. I was the system architect who built the roles. My daily reports stopped getting replies. Even my calendar started populating with phantom meetings. Rooms I hadn't booked, calls I hadn't scheduled. The system had been quietly modified to auto-decline my invites. And in every meeting I did attend, I noticed the same thing. Eye contact became a courtesy, and eventually a mistake. So I adjusted. Not emotionally. That part stayed locked behind the same firewall I'd always kept up. But operationally, I went colder, cleaner. I stopped submitting to the general queue and started archiving directly to Legal's vault. Timestamped, notarized, backed up off-network. Every time Zach bragged about modernizing, I added a note. Every time Leon dismissed controls as legacy dead weight, I printed another report. I became invisible by design. The less I resisted, the faster they pushed me out of the room, which was fine, because every door they shut behind me, I made sure to wedge a file folder in the frame. The day before they officially cut me loose, I finished what I'd started back in April, a consolidated compliance audit of Q2's unresolved flags, with a separate appendix dedicated to credential drift, unsanctioned data tunnels, and yes, those ghost accounts Zach had shrugged off like a missed Slack ping. 97 incidents. 8 flagged as probable regulatory violations. 3 as potential federal exposure. None addressed. I didn't send it through the company's normal compliance pipeline. I knew better by then. I printed 3 physical copies, bound, labeled, and signed on every page. I sealed one in a legal envelope marked for internal counsel, with a cover memo titled, Per Exit Protocol Section 14B. Another I hand-delivered to offsite storage with a timestamped drop receipt. The third I kept. Digitally, I zipped the summary report and sent it to my personal archive with subject, Final, Compliance Snapshot Q2. CC'd the Compliance Shadow Archive I'd quietly routed to my own off-network backup months ago. Just because they didn't believe in protocols didn't mean I had to stop following them. Then I walked into what would be my last all-hands meeting. Leon was already mid-performance. Feet planted, sleeves rolled, grinning like a boy who just taught himself PowerPoint. Let's talk friction, he said. Let's talk what's slowing us down. Then he reached under the conference table and lifted my binder. My risk register. This, he said, holding it up like he was presenting a sacred relic to be burned, is the sort of thing we're evolving past. This isn't a military operation, folks. It's a startup. People laughed. Zach leaned back with that smug tech bro energy, nodding like Leon had just solved war crimes with a rebrand. Leon flipped the register open and mimicked reading aloud. Unauthorized credential duplication, possible cross-domain flag. Needs review. He squinted like it was written in Sanskrit. What even is this? I mean, who talks like this? I sat 3 chairs away, stone-faced, hands clasped. I didn't blink, didn't flinch. I just watched him wave it around like a prop. That binder had taken 42 hours to compile. It had been peer-reviewed, notarized, logged, and now it was stage dressing for a frat boy with a budget. When the meeting ended, he left the binder on the table. I picked it up, straightened the pages, and placed it back in my satchel. If he wanted to pretend it didn't matter, fine. But I wasn't leaving it behind for him to trash. Later that afternoon, I caught a quiet alert on my terminal. One of the central access nodes, the one that had hosted the Q2 system logs, had been scrubbed, deleted at root. actioned by the CTO himself. Zach thought deleting the logs would be enough, that the problem was digital, contained. A quick click and all that clutter would vanish. What he didn't know, what he never bothered to learn, was that I had printed, archived, and notarized those logs 3 days before he ever touched them. The deletion just made it worse. Now it wasn't just neglect. It was tampering. But I didn't confront him. I didn't raise a red flag or type out some grand internal warning. I just made a note. Log entry. 1842, root deletion. CTO actioned, non-compliant with Internal Retention Policy 4.7. Because at this point, I wasn't writing for them anymore. I was writing for the audit. The email came at 6:01 a.m. subject line, quick sync, HR scheduling. No context. Just a 15-minute block on my calendar titled Transition Planning. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. By 9 o'clock, I was in a beige room with a water cooler that hadn't been refilled since Q1 and an HR rep I'd never seen before. Mid-30s, too cheerful, reading from a laminated folder like she was pitching a timeshare. The VP sat beside her, sleeves rolled, smiling with that practiced, benevolent corporate detachment. Restructuring, he said, like it was a mercy. You've been incredibly valuable, but we're evolving our operational posture to meet the demands of our scale goals. I didn't speak, just looked at the envelope in front of me. 4 pages. 1 signature line. The severance was thin, 4 weeks, plus a half-hearted clause about waiving future claims. No equity mention. No exit interview. Just a bulleted list of offboarding steps written by someone who'd never once spoken to me directly. They hadn't even spelled my middle name correctly. I know this is sudden, he added, but we really are grateful. You've helped lay a strong foundation, and now it's time to shift toward. I held up one hand, not to interrupt, but to end it. He blinked, unsure, then nodded. I signed. Then, from my bag, I pulled a second envelope. Hand-labeled. Sealed with a red sticker, per protocol, final exit packet. I slid it across the table. No one asked what it was. No one opened it. The HR rep smiled, gently tucked it under her notes like it was a greeting card, and moved on to badge returns. Leon didn't even look at it. I left without shaking hands. Walking out felt less like a defeat and more like a deflation, the release of pressure from a balloon that had been hissing quietly for months. I didn't cry, didn't feel rage, just an odd, empty relief, like I'd finally exhaled after holding my breath since April. The office was quiet that day. Most of the team was out at a product demo, and I didn't stop by to say goodbye. I had no interest in parting words. The only people who would have understood why I'd stayed so long had already been pushed out or silenced. Downstairs, in the legal wing, I paused at the mail slot outside internal counsel's suite. No one saw me. I took the second copy of the report, hardbound, time-stamped, sealed, and slid it through the drop. Inside, tucked between the executive summary and the credential drift matrix, was a single sheet titled Q2 Control Logs, Confirmed Receipt. Dated, signed, with an internal routing ID. I didn't need to be there when they found it. I just needed to make sure it was there when they went looking. 2 days later, I was at home, standing in the produce aisle of the Kroger off Ridge and 43, thumbing an avocado and pretending I gave a damn about potassium, when my phone buzzed once, then twice, then again in rapid succession. 3 texts, all from former coworkers who hadn't messaged me in weeks. You seeing this? Check internal Slack screenshots. Shit's blowing up. They're getting audited? Back in the car, I opened the secure compliance newsfeed I still subscribed to. Buried halfway down the page was a regulatory bulletin, joint audit enforcement triggered by a federal oversight partner. The Department of Defense had flagged inconsistent security assurance data in relation to a pilot sandbox authentication module. Translation: someone upstream had cooked the logs. I sat there, engine running, bag of bananas forgotten on the passenger seat, watching the first wave hit. There was no announcement, no press release, just a quiet, high-priority flag from a DoD system that doesn't flag anything unless someone's about to lose funding or clearance. The audit team wasn't internal. This came from the outside. And they weren't starting with the shiny Q3 dashboards Leon had bragged about in his quarterly. They were starting with a direct request. Please provide full system control logs for Q2, including credential issuance and access override entries from April 1st to June 30th. Inside the office, I could picture it. Zach spinning in his errand chair, half laughing, half panicking, pretending he didn't hear the request the first time. Leon pacing, one hand on his hip, wondering which in turn forgot to clean the staging documentation. But it wouldn't matter, because Zach, ever the genius, had deleted the primary access node for those logs 3 weeks earlier. Purged them, root and branch. It was logged, of course. I logged everything. But he assumed that deleting the logs meant deleting the history. When legal called the CTO in, he didn't hesitate. They don't exist, Zach said breezily. We upgraded in Q3. Logs from Q2 weren't part of the migration plan. I think compliance had a few summaries, but nothing granular. The company lawyer paused, just for a beat too long, then nodded. Okay, we'll mark them as unavailable, unrecoverable, not retained. No chain of custody. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I was watching. Not physically. I hadn't stepped within a mile of that building since they handed me my cardboard box and that blank HR smile. But digitally, through the audit alerts, the chatter from old teammates, the sudden silence on their investor blog, and a forwarded Slack thread from someone in ops. Zach, just say they're gone. Leon, can we tie this to the compliance restructure? Maybe say she never delivered. Zach, LOL, sure. Paranoid lady ghosted us. And that's what they were going with. That I never submitted. That I walked out in a fog of emotional burnout and failed to turn over my final logs. That the only copy, the one they refused to open, was a ghost file from a paranoid woman no one wanted to believe. Fine. Let them think that. Because ghosts, they haunt. And mine came time-stamped. The call came just after sunset. I was on my back porch, coffee in one hand, bare feet up on the railing, watching a squirrel dismantle my bird feeder like it owed him money. Caller ID, private. But I knew the area code. I let it ring twice before answering. Miss Henley? A voice said, thin with caution. This is Alan from corporate legal. I was wondering if you happen to have any records from Q2 still on file. He said it like someone asking if I still had receipts for a lawn chair purchased 3 years ago. Like it wasn't about a federal audit breathing down their necks. Like he wasn't calling from a boardroom so tense you could hear the sweat hitting leather. I submitted everything, I said calmly. June 30th. Email subject line. Compliance packet, exit summary. Sent to internal legal, CC'd to archive. There was a pause. A long one. The kind where you hear someone frantically typing with the phone pressed to their ear. Then a faint rustle, papers probably. Someone rummaging through folders that hadn't been touched until they realized the fire was real. Okay, he said finally. Okay, yes, I see it here. Attached PDF, exit memo, file references, printed control logs. Correct, I said. Notarized, delivered. Signed receipt included on page 3. He didn't speak, but I could feel the silence tightening like a noose. Somewhere in that room, Zach was probably blinking rapidly, swearing under his breath. Maybe still hoping the logs weren't what they seemed. Maybe thinking he could talk his way around it. Alan broke the silence. The sealed envelope. Do you know if that was ever opened? I'm guessing not, I said. Would have seen the read receipt if it had been scanned. The timestamp's intact. So is the seal. Another pause. I imagined the CTO sitting there, arms crossed, waiting for the lawyer to say something that might save him. Instead, Alan whispered it. Oh no, I didn't say anything. Just let it hang. From my side, the sun had dropped behind the tree line. The air smelled like cut grass and cooling pavement. A dog barked in the distance. Everything felt still. Still in a way it hadn't for months. I'd spent so long archiving, protecting, safeguarding every scrap of proof. Not to be right, not to get revenge, but because I knew they'd treat integrity like optional software. Something you could uninstall if it slowed the system down. And now the weight shifted. From me to them. I could feel it sliding off, inch by inch, as he thanked me quietly and ended the call. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just that desperate undertone people use when they realize the house is already on fire and they just found the gas can point 3 days after that call. The headlines hit. Not front page, not dramatic, but in the gray underbelly of trade feeds and investor channels where real damage leaks first. Mid-scale defense tech firm under review for compliance irregularities. No names. No smoke. Just enough spark to send risk analysts into group chats and investor liaisons into DEFCON posture. IPO lawyers froze the process with language so bloodless it could have been mistaken for weather. Material pause pending clarification of data assurance gaps. Behind the scenes, though, it wasn't a pause. It was a sinkhole. The regulators came in quiet but fast, DoD audit partners, SEC reps, even someone from the Defense Contract Management Agency. And they didn't ask. They informed. Every system touched by the pilot project was flagged for full forensic review. Zach's carefully scrubbed Q3 dashboards were dismissed in minutes. They went straight for the core Q2's logs, my logs. And suddenly the ghost files reappeared. They had to admit it. The logs weren't lost. They had been delivered, time-stamped, signed, archived. The CTO's claim that they'd been purged as part of an upgrade collapsed under a single scanned PDF. The interviews started next. Quiet conference room sessions with compliance liaisons, technical leads, even 2 interns from systems integration. One by one, they were asked the same thing. Were you ever instructed to disregard compliance documentation from Ms. Henley? Did you receive any directive to deprioritize Q2 flags or override credential lockout protocols? And slowly, the evidence bled out. An internal Slack thread surfaced, Zach, joking that my paranoia binder belonged in the Smithsonian. An email from Leon to the ops team. We need less red tape and more results. If she's holding up rollout with risk flags, escalate it to Zach. If legal asks, tell them it was handled in Q3. Handled meaning buried. Then came the worst one, the smoking gun, forwarded by a junior legal associate to external counsel. She left a binder? Lol. Shred it. We've got prettier charts now. They shredded the copy in ops. They forgot about the 2 I handed to legal. And the one I kept. The board wasn't blind anymore. They weren't mad at me. They were furious with them. How had critical compliance logs been ignored? Why did legal not review the exit documents? Why were there no backup logs in the CTO's system? Why had no one informed investors about the internal risk rating from Q2? For the first time, Leon didn't have a smirk. And Zach didn't have a joke. And me? I was at home, fixing the hinge on my garage door, a podcast playing in the background. I didn't check the news. Didn't need to. My inbox was quiet. No new messages. Just the slow echo of a machine coming apart. One I had spent years holding together while they laughed behind conference doors. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean, like the weight that had lived in my chest for a year had finally packed its bags and left. The lights were off in the boardroom. Just the glow of laptop screens and the slow, mechanical whir of a printer spitting out the document that would kill their defense. Alan, the company lawyer, sat at the end of the table, sleeves rolled to the elbow, tie off, eyes sunken from 2 nights of bad sleep and worse news. The printout was crisp. White paper. Black ink. For pages. Subject line in bold. Compliance packet. Exit summary. He held it up like it was radioactive. This, he said, his voice hoarse, was time-stamped June 30th. Delivered to legal. Signed. Read receipt confirmed by our own system logs. Page 2 references sealed delivery. Page 3 has a notarized control log manifest. Page 4 includes a routing number to this office. No one moved. Leon tried first. Okay. But hold on, let's not overreact. Maybe she added that after the fact. Maybe it wasn't in the original. Alan didn't even blink. This was archived in immutable storage. She followed protocol. You shredded your copy. That's on you. Zach coughed out a noise halfway between a laugh and a denial. But if the logs existed, why didn't legal flag them sooner? Why didn't someone say something? Alan turned to him slowly, like someone finally realizing the person he thought was driving the bus had been asleep at the wheel the whole time. You told legal they didn't exist. The room went ice cold. There were no jokes now. No scalability buzzwords or flowcharts to hide behind. Just a printed email, a red receipt, and the weight of every ignored red flag crushing down all at once. Then, barely audible, Alan muttered it, the phrase no one wants to hear in a room full of lawyers, investors, and failing reputations. Oh no, it wasn't theatrical. It wasn't even loud. It was just honest and final. Across town, I was standing at my kitchen counter in my socks, coffee in hand, reading a news alert on my phone. Regulatory freeze confirmed amid internal compliance turmoil. IPO under extended review. Under it, a blurry photo of Zach walking out of the building, shoulders hunched, phone to his ear. I didn't smile. Not because I wasn't satisfied, but because satisfaction had nothing to do with it. You don't smile when the house that ignored fire codes finally burns down. You just sip your coffee, tilt your head, and wonder how they ever thought it wouldn't by the end of the month. The IPO was dead. Not delayed. Not repositioned for strategic timing. Dead. The press releases tried to soften it, talked about market conditions, internal process recalibrations, and other corporate hospice language. But the filings told the real story. Investor withdrawal, regulatory standstill, suspension of key government contracts pending outcome of an active review. The CTO stepped down, citing family priorities. Leon, ever the spin artist, was placed on administrative leave. Those sources close to the board told journalists it was more of a don't-come-back situation with extra steps. An anonymous board member leaked a memo describing systemic disregard for procedural integrity at the executive level. In corporate speak, that's a headshot. The government pulled back on the DoD pilot program, citing log inconsistency, and opened the bidding to other firms. One of those firms happened to be led by my former colleague from compliance. Someone they'd let go the same quarter they started ignoring my reports. The irony writes itself. Internally, they gutted ops. Legal got a new head. External auditors were brought in to revalidate all security and access policies from the last 4 quarters. Compliance, once the department they couldn't even be bothered to staff fully, was now listed on the org chart as a direct report to the board. Not finance. Not tech. The board. And me? I turned down the interview request. It came in on a Friday morning. Voicemail from a business reporter who just wanted to get my side of the story. I listened to her voice. So eager, so rehearsed, and deleted it. I wasn't interested in vindication from a stranger. I'd already won the only way that mattered. They didn't take me seriously until the structure they ignored me to protect started sinking under its own ego. By then, the cost wasn't mine to carry. I sat on the same porch where I'd answered that lawyer's call, pulled a blanket over my lap, and watched the first leaves of fall scatter across the yard. I wasn't angry anymore, wasn't bitter, just tired. And finally, still, there's no award for being right in compliance. There's only silence when the weight finally lifts. They called me excessive, paranoid, a bottleneck, but I wasn't the one who cracked under pressure. They were. They thought I was the risk. Turns out I was the lock on the vault. And they broke it,